And the section that deals with how to build a campaign from all these different adventures was basically sort of the first chapter that gets you ready to start thinking about the long term of all these individual adventures.
Yeah, so once you've sort of committed in your mind as a DM that you are going to run a campaign, that is to say more than one adventure with your particular group, then Chapter 5 of the Dungeon Master's Guide is going to be your best friend, because it is going to walk you through step by step what developing a campaign that is fun and engaging and rich and deep and full of possibility, what that entails.
What are those first steps? Because I know everyone has a different process, but what do you find to be the easiest? Is like just kind of a loose skeleton to keep track of?
Yeah, so if you're not exactly sure what style of campaign you want to run, you can have a conversation with your players about that before you lay any groundwork. Like, what sort of vibe are they going for? Do they want kind of high fantasy, or are they a group that really gets into horror themes or stuff like that? And so you have that conversation. You kind of blend what their aspirations are with your own, and then you sit down and you go, okay, I think I've got an idea. What is the basic premise of the campaign? Or another way to ask that question is, what are going to be the conflicts that drive the campaign? Because if you think in that terms, things will start to crystallize around who the villains are and what are they up to and how are the characters going to become meddlesome objects in these stories going on. And so laying out the premise, thinking about those conflicts, and as well as the themes and the tone and the atmosphere and the flavor you're trying to evoke. I think that's an important first step, and that's what's discussed in the DMG. Then, once you have an idea of what the main conflicts are, what the overall tone and what the key themes of your campaign is, you then have to really think about, okay, how are the players going to get drawn in? How am I going to hitch the characters to this wagon, which is the campaign I'm trying to trying to launch? And the DMG talks about different ways that you as a dungeon master can think about your campaign in terms of what the players expect to get out of it and what the characters will be doing, at least at the outset. Because you've run a campaign before, Todd, and the longer they go, the more likely that the motivations of the characters will change. They will sort of grow into the campaign, and it will go off in strange directions, and their needs will change, and suddenly the tone might change, or one of the main conflicts of the campaign might get jettisoned in favor of a new one. Those things happen, but at the outset, it's very important. How are the characters going to get sucked in? Then you plan out the adventures. Like, okay, how are they actually going to encounter my campaign setting? What events are going to lead to what other events? You don't need to plan too far. That's another thing that we talk about in the DMG, because crap will happen. Sometimes it'll be player instigated. Sometimes it will be the roll of the dice that does it. Sometimes it'll be you as a dungeon master just deciding to shake things up.
Yeah, the inspiration you get from the players will adjust your adventures, hopefully.
Yeah.
If you're a good dungeon master, you may be inspired by something they did, and you can see, okay, this can go this way.
Exactly. But I, as a dungeon master, like to think, 2 or 3 adventures ahead.
Yeah.
There's the one I'm planning to run tomorrow, and then I'm thinking about the next couple. And often, the farther out it gets, the more vague it gets, or because things are subject to change. And then finally, at some point, you're going to have to think about, as a DM, how you're going to wrap the campaign up, or when you're going to wrap it up, because not all campaigns have to last forever. Some can be short and tight, and others can go on for years. So thinking about, okay, I'm going to run a horror-themed campaign. My players are really grooving on it. I've got a really strong idea for a horror campaign, but it's probably going to wear out its welcome in, 6 months. So I'm going to plan accordingly and try to wrap this thing up in X number of sessions. So one of the things we talk about in the DMG right at the outset is the campaign journal, the concept of keeping your notes in an organized way. And there are different ways to do that, but it was important for us this time around to actually give some examples of things that you could use to help organize. And so what we've done is we've given some samples of tracking sheets to help you, as a DM, not lose sight of these important details.
Yeah, and those tracking sheets are spread throughout the book, but there are like 3 in a row.
Yeah,
right
there's
at
a
the beginning
concentrated
of the
number
campaign chapter.
here. There's one on that just talks about your campaign journal. It's like a session tracker, basically, where you can outline before a session, what are some important details that I need to keep in mind for the session that's coming up. And then also, during the session, you can take notes here, so that if something interesting happens, or if a character says something that's just so hilariously funny that you don't want to forget it later, you can jot it down. If you created a situation or an NPC or a location on the fly and you just want to write down the name so you don't forget it later, you can jot it down there. There's another tracking sheet that's all about the DM's character tracker. James, do you want to talk about the origin of this?
I do. It's really funny. This is the last tracking sheet that was added to the book. Actually, during printout reviews, very close to when we sent the book to the printer, we had text talking about the importance of sort of keeping track of all this information about each character and their player. And we realized very late in the game that this would be much better as another sheet you can fill out and put in your campaign journal. So it talks about things like, what are the activities that this player particularly enjoys? Are they combat focused or really acting focused or what? And what are the knives that player has given you to use on their character? What are the character's motivations and interests and personalities and contacts and connections, family, friends? What are their quirks? What are the things they enjoy? What are the magic items they have? So just a handy resource for keeping track of each character in the campaign as the campaign moves along.
And I talked earlier about the idea of making sure you're thinking about the conflicts of your campaign. And one of the rules of thumb I've always used that's sort of baked into this book is try to think of three conflicts, because you will not necessarily know which ones your players will glom onto. And if your campaign is going to run for several sessions, sometimes it's nice to switch. Like they were on this track dealing with this conflict in your world.
Yeah.
And then, there's one episode where suddenly this other conflict intrudes, and it makes the players realize, oh, this isn't a one-note world that we're in.
Yeah.
There is all kinds of stuff going on, and we've just basically found another track.
And that's true of like my favorite works of fiction or TV shows. Like I love Peaky Blinders, and you have lots of nemesis to the main character in that show, and they pop in and they pop out, and you don't know when they're going to come back in. So you never feel like this is this section, this is that section. When they interbleed, it makes it feel like a real world, and a real narrative.
Yes, and it gives you a little bit more flavor and texture, and it also gives you different ways to introduce variable themes in the campaign. This conflict might be all about the perils of war, whereas this conflict is more about humanity versus nature,
right.
Or civilization versus the untamed frontier. Some of those conflicts might be more impactful or important than others. Some of them might last longer than others. The conflict between the village and the goblin baron, who is basically taxing all the roads leading to and from the village, that's a conflict that might resolve itself in a couple adventures.
Yeah.
Whereas the conflict against the hobgoblin warlord who's raising an army to run roughshod over the halfling shires, that's a conflict that may last basically an entire season of your campaign.
Right.
Whatever a season is to you.
Yeah, I tend to make villains that have this kind of, I know this villain is going to have this kind of arc, and this villain is going to have a bigger long-term, in the adventures, and then I always have a third big bad.
Yes.
That's been behind everything.
Yes, and then in the DMG, after we've sort of helped you construct the early stages of your campaign journal, we also talk about character arcs and how they're important to think about in a campaign. What is driving the characters, and what is each character's journey? The first level barbarian or the first level paladin will have goals and will have sort of a personality, but as the campaign plays out, they're going to grow and they're going to become more powerful. And they're going to meet people and factions and organizations and villains who are going to reshape their thinking about the world. And they'll have new goals and new aspirations. They may even change alignment or personality along the way because of some traumatic thing that happened or or what have you. You know all about that.
I do. Yeah. I love having a good NPC go bad and the bad NPC eventually become good.
Right.
I've always liked to make references, but like Farscape has Scorpius. Scorpius is the most villainous villain you could imagine in fantasy and sci-fi, and eventually becomes a member of the team.
Right. But he's got dimension to him, and characters in most campaigns do as well. They're not cardboard cutouts. They've got some depth, and I think one of the great things about a campaign, one of the things that elevates it above a standalone adventure, is in a campaign you can explore that depth.
Yeah.
And so we talk about the idea of, okay, what are the characters' motivations? What are their goals, their ambitions, their quirks and whims? We talk about things like their friends, their family. What are background elements in the campaign that you as a DM can work with your player on to give that character really deep roots in the campaign? You know, is your character heir to a kingdom? Is your character, the inheritor of a sword passed down through generations of grandmothers or grandfather, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then thinking about adventures in terms of what is going to motivate the character, what the character is going to latch onto. An adventure might feature a rival from one character's past. That's a great motivator.
It's always hilarious.
Another might be, your benefactor is a powerful spellcaster who's willing to share spells from their spell book if you go off on adventures and do things for that person. Forming those connections, those tethers to the campaign, very, very important. And one of the most fun things to think about as a dungeon master is, okay, how am I going to plug the characters in?
How am I going to get a reaction?
Yep.
Is always the first thing I think.
And the Dungeon Master's Guide, and this was true in 2014, we've just reorganized the information to make it more accessible and useful. We talk about conflicts tied to specific themes or genres or tones of campaigns. And we give you examples to plunder. So if you're having trouble coming up with conflicts of your own, but you know that you want to run, say, a supernatural horror campaign, we give you some examples. We say, here's a conflict, the Faceless Lord. Dweeblex, the Faceless Lord, the demon lord of slimes and oozes out of the abyss into the Underdark. The characters hear from subterranean folk who need help defeating the demon lord and his minions. So that's a fun conflict with supernatural horror elements. Another is School of Necromancy. Vampires open a college of necromancy, attracting evil necromancers who need fresh corpses for their studies. An order of vampire hunters seeks the characters' help. But maybe you're not running that kind of campaign. Maybe you're running a swashbuckling campaign.
Right.
So we give you examples of swashbuckling conflicts, like inherited antagonists. A character inherits a magic item from a deceased relative, unaware that this relative's enemies are after the item. Another example is the Waking Deep. A monstrous horror slumbering in the depths of the ocean stirs, driving minions such as Sahuagin, Marrows, and dragon turtles to attack seafaring vessels. So suddenly you're defending shipping fleets and privateers from incursions from the sea. So lots of examples tied to very specific types of campaigns. Also, we talk about in this book the idea of you not making up a campaign of your own at all. There are lots of campaigns out there. We've published several, and there are also third-party ones. It is just perfectly fine for you to take a published campaign setting and make it your own. And that kind of gets at a lot of what's happening in the back half of this campaign's chapter is after we've dispensed advice on how to start a campaign right, some notes about session 0 and sitting down with the players to create the characters as a group so that they make a nice, well-rounded party.
Right.
Coming up with hooks that link the characters together. Oh, you two are brother and sister? Great. Or you're both linked by a common benefactor who lives in the town where we're starting? Great. Having those conversations in session 0. Once you're past that and you've got your well-rounded party, coming up with your first adventure. You can decide whether you want them to be episodic, which means they all sort of have a beginning and an end.
Yeah.
It's not like one story continuously running together, which is more of a serialized experience. You can also think about ways to introduce recurring elements, which can help invest the players even more, like giving them a home base and giving them a prominent friend whom they trust and they like. Somebody who says this world is worth saving. Giving them friendly resources to draw upon so then they don't feel like they're just out alone. Or creating likable villains that they want to fight over and over and over again because they're just so much fun. Thinking about things like weird one-off episodes. This is one of my favorite things I do as a dungeon master is I've got a long-running campaign. Everything's going just fine, hunky-dory. I'm going to throw the characters a curveball.
Yeah.
We're going to have a beach episode.
Yeah.
Where their characters are spending the entire episode lounging on the beach, just to break up the fun. And there's a section in the DMG that talks about break episodes and what they mean and the power that they have. For this game, we're going to all go to the carnival.
Yeah.
Or we're going to have a shopping session, or we're going to have a session where you're all telling me what's happening in your bastions. There's wonderful opportunities to, in a campaign, inject these little punctuation marks, these oddities.
One of my favorite ones is I have a bag of devouring, and it eats the party, and inside of it is a demiplane that is first edition.
Right.
So
yes.
Everything kills you. Like
Yes.
hard rains, bad weather.
Yes.
It's just,
Yeah.
And it puts you in a weird little one-off adventure.
Exactly.
And that has no effect on the outer world.
Correct. One of my favorite things to do, and I've done this in some of the stream shows I've done, is holiday episodes.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we're not in a horror campaign, but we're going to have a Halloween episode next week.
Yeah.
Or we're going to have a Thanksgiving episode next week.
Yeah.
And so it's going to, they know going in, it's going to be a little bizarre and off and
Yeah.
super fun. One of the most important things that I think we added to this book was the campaign setting. Because not only did we want to give you advice on how to create a campaign of your own or to take an existing campaign and repurpose it for your own needs, we wanted to give you an actual setting, which no DMG had done before, so that you could have an example to look at and go, aha, this is how I could build a campaign setting of my own, or, oh, I could take this, make a few changes, and call it mine.
And that's the Greyhawk setting, which we've gone into in
Yes.
depth already. Check out that video if you want to know more, but it is a perfect framework for like, okay, it's a great world map, it's a great city map, and it has a lot of what you would expect from fantasy in D&D.
Yeah.
And you can rename that if you want to or not.
Absolutely.
Make it your
Yes.
own.
If you don't know what some of Wizards' published campaign settings are, we have a helpful little table in this Dungeon Master's Guide that describes them. One of the great things for me about putting this table in was it was nice to provide just a couple lines of description for each of these settings because they're all doing something kind of different. Mm-hmm. Like if you're running a Planescape setting, that is very different from a Spelljammer setting.
Yeah.
Even though they're both kind of looking at the multiverse.
Right.
They're kind of taking place in the same general sort of not in the world, away from the material plane, away from the planet.
Spelljammer feels like exploration, like you're on the edges of the multiverse in some way and traveling that way, whereas it's, I feel like Sigil is like just downtown London. Like you're the center of the entire universe, right? Like there's just a lot going on. It's a whole different vibe. Like you're like
Yes.
pirates, or Sigil is like a city.
They're both dealing with the planes, but they're very different tonally.
Yes.
Yeah. So giving the DM a little bit of information about each of these settings just to whet their appetites if they've never heard of them before.
How do you describe Ravenloft?
I describe Ravenloft as heroes are drawn into the gloomy domains of dread, cursed realms ruled by evil lords, and must find a means to escape.
And to your point, when you say like having these adventures that break the norm, Ravenloft has one of the best conceits for that. I feel like one of the best devices is the fog. The fog starts rising up the mists and grabs the party from like the prime material plane and sucks them into the Shadowfell, into the domains of dread.
Yes.
And that's great for like a one-shot, or that is great for a sudden shift in the adventure.
Exactly, because one of the beauties of Ravenloft is it's not really one setting, it's like a collection of micro settings.
Yes.
And so when you buy into a Ravenloft game, what you're really saying is you're going to go to one of these domains, and like you say, the domain might just be a haunted house on a hill.
Yeah.
That's the whole domain. And so you deal with that, you find a way to escape, and you're out. Sometimes the domain is much bigger, and getting out can be a lot more problematic.
Yeah, I love those devices. And Planescape has a similar device of you can take a portal to Planescape. You can take a Spelljammer to Spelljammer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that while the campaigns chapter obviously has a wealth of information for new DMs, it also helps experienced DMs not only by giving them specific handouts that they can then repurpose and use in their own campaign journals, not only by giving them a campaign setting that they can take and run with, but also I think a lot of the tips in the session 0 section and a lot of the conflicts and other hooks that we give here service DMs of all experience levels.
Is there advice on how to end a campaign?
There is indeed, yes.
That is sometimes the hardest thing. It's the most amazing thing to get to a point where your campaign is ending, but it's also very hard to let go.
Yeah, and there are different situations under which a campaign can end. It can end in a planned way, or it can end in an unplanned way. Suddenly, 2 of your 4 players are moving away. Things need to wrap up more quickly than expected. So yes, we and every DM of every experience level has to deal with the campaign ending at some point, either by force or by design. And so we do talk about that in our usual fashion here, trying to dispense only the advice that we know is tried and true and useful. But one of the key pieces of advice, and it seems obvious, but maybe it isn't, is the players have a say in the conversation. And so when you are wrapping up a campaign or thinking about wrapping up, it's good to involve the players, get their input. One of the reasons for doing that is ideally they've been so invested in their characters that they don't want the series to be canceled before the stories of their characters are played out. So having a conversation with them about how you can bring their character arcs to a satisfying conclusion, not necessarily revealing everything in that conversation, but just asking them, okay, is there anything that you really want your character to have achieved before the end of the campaign? And then as a DM, can I actually make that a reality?
I always tend to give them monologues at the end to describe, like, even 20 years from now, where do those characters go?
Right, yes.
So everyone kind of takes a turn being the dungeon master.
Yes. One of the other things we also talk about is the idea that, let's say the campaign is ending because you as a DM are kind of exhausted. One of the possibilities is you hand the campaign off to somebody else and you solicit the players and ask them, hey, would one of you like to basically take this campaign and do something fun with it? That's a possibility as well. We talk about that a little bit.
Is there a campaign that you have been most proud of, just personally? Because I had an experience, I got to Dungeon Master with Megan at D&D in the castle, and I know you don't necessarily love timey-wimey stuff. I do love timey-wimey stuff, but I had
When you say timey-wimey stuff, you mean like time travel?
Yes, time travel shenanigans. So I had the players on was basically a mechanical walking gnome device. The Shadowfell, for some reason, had taken up like the bottom 10 feet of the entire world, so they needed these devices that lifted you up above them. But they were on this barge, basically, and they had to roll perception checks. I kept on having them roll perception checks and investigation checks while they were there amongst this big crowd. Whereas later on, 3 days later, 3 days of like 8-hour games, they came back into time, went to the same barge, and had to beat that the difficulty was what they rolled for perception.
Okay.
So I was very proud of that. That they when I saw my players realize they had to beat their own rolls in stealth.
Okay.
I was like, I have arrived somehow in this idea of this campaign.
That is a much more controlled time travel experience than I've...
It was very hard to pull off. I don't recommend it necessarily.
Yes.
But
I do remember back in 4th edition having a time travel scenario where the characters went back, met themselves.
Yeah.
And suddenly each player was playing 2 characters that were kind of identical.
Did you have a moment where you're like, oh, I nailed this? Or
well, time travel specifically?
No, not specifically time travel. I mean for your D&D campaign.
Oh yeah, all the time. And an example, when I was doing the live stream show Dice Camera Action, I would very deliberately incite the players in fun ways. I found interesting ways, I thought, to put their characters in situations that genuinely terrified them, which is good for a horror-themed campaign, which is what that game started off being.
Yeah.
It went on long enough that I was able to change the tone of it and the setting, sort of season to season. But in the outset, it was a Ravenloft-themed game, and my biggest fear was that they would laugh more than feel the dread of the setting.
Yeah.
Just because, at a D&D game, silliness is pervasive.
Yeah, you don't have to write for the silliness.
No, the silliness will come out naturally. What I wanted to make sure of is that there are actual moments where the terror seeps through, and I thought that I succeeded at that pretty well.
It can be an amazingly emotional and gratifying experience. It's hard to write that in a book, but the way you feel after like a 3-year campaign is indescribable.
Yes, you are in effect kind of like a showrunner, right?
Yeah.
It becomes your baby, and it becomes your player's baby because they're highly invested in it, and everybody wants it to end satisfactorily, and they want it to be a fun experience. And there's nothing that compares to it, other than I can think like being a showrunner.
Yeah.
Where you get to be amazed by the direction it goes. At the same time, you're kind of shaping how it goes. I guess it's like working on any piece of great art.
It's something bigger than you.
Yeah, it becomes bigger than you, and you don't necessarily know what it's going to be when it's done. But the journey is as rewarding as the whole picture.
So be a dungeon master.
So be a dungeon master, because it rocks.
Thank you so much for watching. Every week leading up to the brand new 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide, we'll have new videos and premieres telling you more about the book. To pre-order the 2024 Core Rulebooks digital physical bundle, click on the links in this video description and find out more about all the pre-order bonuses, including frames, backdrops, dice sets, digital dragon art book, and the digital golden dragon mini. I'm Todd Kenrick. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the like, the subscribe button, and also the notification button so that you're alerted when we have brand new videos about the future of D&D.